This is Autoline Daily, the show dedicated to enthusiasts of the global automotive industry. 5 years ago, Renault named Luca as CEO. He quickly set out to transform the company. He turned it from a money loser to solidly profitable. He spun off its ICE operations into a new company called Hearse. He created a new software and EV division called Ampere, and yesterday, he decided to quit Renault and join a company called Caring, which owns a bunch of luxury brands including Gucci. That sent shockwaves through the industry and left the Renault board scrambling to find a new leader. And hot on the heels of that announcement, Nissan says it's going to reduce its investment in Renault. The Japanese automaker currently owns 15% of Renault, but both companies have an agreement to cut both of their cross-ownership holdings down to 10%. However, we already knew that. Nissan is choosing to say it again on the day that DeMeo is quitting. Nissan should be able to raise about $640 million by selling off 5 percentage points of its holdings in Renault, and it promises to plow that money back into developing new models and shoring up its shaky finances. Ford CEO Jim Farley says the automaker is critically low on rare earth supplies. In an interview with Bloomberg, he said its rare earth supply is day-to-day and that it's had to shut down plants because of the shortage. Last week, China agreed to grant temporary licenses for rare earths to suppliers of Ford, GM, and Stellantis. However, Farley says it hasn't seen an improvement in supply yet and that China is only approving applications for rare earths one at a time. China, which controls 90% of global rare earth production, began restricting supplies in April in retaliation to U.S. tariffs. Last week, President Trump signed legislation revoking an EPA waiver that allows California to set its own emission standards. However, Stellantis still has to follow California's mandate because of a deal it signed with the state last year. Stellantis was struggling to comply with the state's emission regulations, but it didn't want to buy credits to meet them. So it made a deal to avoid penalties in the short term in exchange for agreeing to meet California's zero-emission vehicle or ZEV requirements starting with the 2026 model year through 2030. The rules require 35% of new car sales to be ZEVs in 2026, and it ramps up to 68% in 2030. And as part of the deal, Stellantis said it would follow California's rules regardless of any judicial or federal action preventing them from going into effect. And it's going to be tough for Stellantis to comply with the rules. While plug-in hybrids are allowed to account for 20% of its requirement, PHEVs only accounted for 8% of Stellantis' sales nationwide last year. And it only has 3 EVs on sale, which accounted for less than 2% of its sales in the first quarter.
There's nothing wrong with heavy metal.
Hey, lighten up.
But with world-class composite material, Teijin Automotive Technologies makes vehicles lighter, safer, and more eco-friendly.
Last week, automakers in China agreed to make payments to suppliers within 60 days. But suppliers say they're skeptical the companies will follow through with their promise. Car companies typically pay suppliers in 60 days, but in China, that is stretched to hundreds of days in some cases. So the government stepped in last week to help speed up payments because suppliers, especially smaller ones, are struggling financially. But some suppliers are concerned automakers will find workarounds. One practice automakers could use is to issue promissory notes, which delays cash recovery for an additional period. Of the 17 automakers that pledged to speed up payments, only BAIC and SAIC agreed to not issue promissory notes. The others didn't specify how they'll make the payments. Despite the UK negotiating a 10% tariff on the first 100,000 cars it imports to the US each year instead of 25%, JLR is still considering raising prices to offset the higher fees. While Range Rovers are made in the UK, its Defender brand is built in Slovakia, which is part of the European Union and subject to the 25% tariff. As a result, JLR also lowered its EBIT margin forecast from 10% down to a range of 5 to 7% for the year. NIO recently announced that it's expanding into 7 new European countries, but electricvehicles.com reports that it's giving up on one very important market. The Chinese automaker has suspended plans to enter the U.S., which was part of a global expansion first revealed in 2021. NIO had already operated an innovation center in San Jose, California for 5 years by the time of that announcement, and in 2022 expanded the facility even more. But over the last year, the company has eliminated many of the teams working there, and the new report says it accelerated its decision not to enter the U.S. market due to trade tensions between the U.S. and China, as well as new tariffs on Chinese imports. And if Bank of America analyst John Murphy is right, a lack of market share could be another reason for backing out of the U.S. Murphy predicts EV market share will stick to about 8%, roughly where it was at the end of last year, for the next 5 years to come, blaming inconsistent support from the government. However, Murphy also predicts that overall sales will grow to 16.5 million this year and to a possible 18 million by 2028, which means that overall EV sales will grow as well. For the first time ever, Peugeot is applying its sporty GTI badge to an all-electric vehicle. The E208 GTI is 30 millimeters, or just over an inch lower, comes with larger front rotors, 4-piston front calipers, springs and shocks with specific hydraulic stops, a rear sway or anti-roll bar, and unique 18-inch wheels that widen the track. Power comes from a single electric motor that makes 280 horsepower, which will accelerate the car from 0 to 100 kilometers an hour, which is similar to 0 to 60, in 5.7 seconds. CATL supplies the 54 kilowatt-hour battery pack for the E208 GTI, which provides 350 kilometers, or about 215 miles of range, on the WLTP test cycle. While no pricing is available yet, the model is expected to hit the European market before the end of the year. Akio Toyota has famously defended hybrid cars by saying one EV puts out as much pollution as 3 hybrids. But university researchers in China say he's wrong. One university did a study which found that EVs emit 20 to 30% less CO2 over their lifetimes than hybrids. That even takes China's coal-heavy generating infrastructure into account. And it's not just Chinese researchers who are saying this. The Argonne National Lab in the U.S. did an extensive study that found that EVs were cleaner than the average gasoline-powered vehicles after both have been driven 19,000 miles. And they're cleaner than hybrids after they've been driven about 28,000 miles. Moreover, EV manufacturing and electrical grids continue to get cleaner, while ICE production does not. Ian Callum, the former head of design at Jaguar, and who also worked for Ford, Aston Martin, and Tom Walkinshaw Racing, was in Detroit this weekend to receive the prestigious Eyes on Design Lifetime Achievement Award. It's voted on by the top designers in the industry, as well as previous winners. During the course of the evening, it came out that Ian was the one who designed the state hearse for Queen Elizabeth II. It was based on a Jaguar XJ, and the Queen personally approved his design and added her own input. That was in 2013. But Callum was told to never talk about the car, which was put in a box and only removed until her funeral in 2022. It's the first time he's ever gone public with the story. And so, there's your automotive anecdote for the day. But that's a wrap for this show. Thanks for tuning in.
Autoline Daily is brought to you by Bridgestone, solutions for your journey. Intrepid Control Systems, over-the-air engineering boost your game. Teijin Automotive Technologies, the formula for better mobility. And by
making a life full of memories, one road trip at a time. That's what really matters. Bridgestone Weather Peak Tires, with a 70,000-mile limited warranty.
Developing today's vehicles, issues can happen in an instant. What good is knowing your problems without the data to solve them? Meet Wireless Neovi Cloud, your secure off-the-shelf solution, empowering real-time collaboration for quick resolution. With Wireless Neovi Cloud, your team can prevent issues before they can escalate. Driver communication data and remote diagnostics to analyze and resolve your problems using OTA, allowing your executives oversight throughout the process. Wireless Neovi Cloud, your vehicle update solution in production and on the road. Intrepid Control Systems, driven by your data.